To you today's presenters. Dr. Zain Shamoon completed his PhD in Human Development and Family Studies in 2017 at Michigan State University. He's dedicated to the creation of spaces where people can tell their personal stories en route to their own wellness. In March 2015, he helped launch the Narratives of Pain Project, which is a group emotional outlet of personal narrative and catharsis based in Metro Detroit and now Seattle. Currently, Zain is a core faculty member in the Couple and Family Therapy program at Antioch University, Seattle, and a therapist at Northwest Relationships in Tacoma. He was also the 2019 WAMT Educator of the Year award winner. Currently, he's quarantined alone, coping by listening and dancing to nostalgic music, among other things. Anthony Pennant earned his master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Drexel University in 2012. And is a licensed marriage and family therapist and approved supervisor through LMFT. He is a current PhD student in the MFT program at Antioch, New England, and is a full-time faculty member in the Couple and Family Therapy department at Antioch University, Seattle. Anthony has extensive experience in working with individuals, couples, and families, including neurodiversity in children. In addition to his work with family, he has served on various nonprofit organizations, including the Mnuchin Center for Family, as well as WAMFT, for which he is currently the legislative chair. At this time, Anthony maintains a private practice in Seattle, supporting people of color, blended families, special needs children and their families, as well as the LGBT+ community. It is my privilege and honor to introduce my friends, Zain and Anthony.
Right, can everyone see us? Yeah?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
Now I can see you.
All right.
All right, take it away.
All right, well, good morning.
Good morning.
Live from quarantine. It's Saturday morning, and you're gonna witness us hang out for a couple hours and interact. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen for our presentation here. So what we're going to do to start is just kind of, well, I don't know. Let's just introduce ourselves a little bit more first. Again, I'm Zain. Like Jen said, I am sitting here in quarantine, and a lot of these topics that I'm going to be talking to Anthony about are pertinent to me personally, but I think they're relevant to our field. And so I'm excited to just sort of chat with you all for a couple hours here. How about you, Anthony?
Same. I'm really excited. Obviously, I'm Anthony Pennant, and I am in the same spot that I think I've been in all week for every class that's been taught and every session that I've had. It's the same spot. So, yeah. But I'm excited. I'm excited, and these topics are pretty personal, and they have been running through my mind, and I'm sure yours too, Zain. And it's going to be good to kind of talk about and normalize, because it's been happening to all of us. And I don't know if we've had a container or a space to kind of just talk as therapists, right? To kind of normalize that. So I'm excited.
Yeah. So just to start, I'm going to frame how we're going to talk about these topics. This is not supposed to be hyper academic today. This is going to be our, professional hug to ourselves and to you. Like was stated earlier. And, with respect to that, we understand that during this time, there's been unique stressors that have been placed upon our practices, how we've sort of shifted to attend to our clients, but also our own general wellness, in our personal lives, and how we're taking care of ourselves as our practices are shifting as well. And this is something that we ignore in general as helping professionals, is how to take care of ourselves. I know I've skipped way too many lunches out of the pretense of, well, I could just take another client right now. And, that's never been appropriate, but especially now in the pandemic, we'll talk more about this. We don't just have time to fill up more clients, and it may seem like we can, logistically speaking, well, I don't have to go here, I don't have to go there, for many of us, but I think what might be more important is to practice kindness and to understand some basics about how the body functions, so that we're not overwhelming ourselves. And hopefully when this is all done, we have better boundaries going back into shifting into normalcy. So yeah, this is going to be less academic and more just like a, professional hug. And we're also going to highlight how to keep well and how to be responsive to clients during this time. Those are connected goals more than ever. And they always have been. I know if you're not taking care of yourself and you're seeing clients throughout the week, it's going to have an impact on your clients. Maybe you can still hustle it and find a way to show up for your clients in a consistent way, but the depth or the intensity by which you can really show up for them is undermined when we're not taking care of ourselves. So this is definitely a time to learn more about that and to really center that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And another way to look at this is we're here to have solidarity. Selfishly, I need solidarity from all of you, to be honest. When I'm seeing clients, I saw clients yesterday. What's the last time you saw clients, Anthony?
Yesterday, last night.
Yeah, how many did you have?
Way too many. 3.
So, I could definitely use the solidarity. And, if any of you are out there feeling kind of like, sometimes we're siloed anyway as a profession when we're in our private practices. And, just this is selfishly like important for me to share that solidarity with you during this time as we're changing around our practices. And also to, just as a reminder, this presentation is going to be a reminder to take good care of yourself and your work. It's not an or, if you're working, you can't take care of yourself, or if you're taking care of yourself, that means you can't work. This is definitely a time of and. I mean, globally, it's a time of and as people are struggling to find ways to economically survive. I know that I'm privileged in that respect. Many of us are, so I think like really focusing on oneself and remembering to take care of ourselves and our work is going to be important. In addition, our family members and our community members and finding ways to reach out to them. So we'll be talking about all that today. So I just wanted to frame the type of talk we're going to have. You're not going to take a million professional notes. I'm not going to give you a million citations today. We're just going to be talking as a field, as colleagues, as esteemed quarantine warriors to just kind of hold each other up during this time.
I like that, by the way. Esteemed quarantine warriors.
Yeah. I want to say that I prepared that, but I thought of it just now and I thought it was nerdy enough to say out loud. So then I did it. And now you're happy about it. So I'm happy about it. Cool. And then just some objectives. These are things that we hope you take away from it. But, sit back and relax. You don't have to worry too much about this. But, hopefully you'll be able to identify, if it helps you to take notes. We'll talk about many different ways to take care of yourselves. We'll, talk about and reflect about different ways that you can sort of tend to your practice and to your clients during this time, maybe in different ways than you're used to. But, the important thing is to pair that with a conviction about how you can take care of yourself. And, maybe during this time you can acknowledge or jot some notes down about how you can take care of yourself in terms of a plan or a routine or something that you need to have during your week or your day in order to take care of your practice, have the energy for it, but also for yourself. So these are just some learning objectives. Feel free to take notes throughout. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation. Like I said, all these slides leading up to now are just like fodder for you're going to see us hang out for a couple hours. And we're going to go through 7 different topics that we think are important during this time. I'm actually going to change the view here. Anthony, can you see the presenter view now? All right.
I can.
Cool. So cool for any community fans out there. But I'm going to go ahead and launch the first topic, and we're just going to talk. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to ask those. We may, during this presentation, make time for some of those, but if we don't and we're having too much fun, we're going to make sure that we have a dedicated question and answer at the end to attend to some of those questions. Okay. Radical changes to the profession. For example, I changed my font for this. But radical changes to the profession. As we know, a lot of us have had to switch to telehealth. And, for a long time, our field has been talking about how can we incorporate telehealth as a regular part of our fields. Where is that viable? Where is that necessary for a lot of our clients? This has been a little bit different, right? We've all suddenly have had to become telehealth providers very quickly. And personally speaking, I kind of don't like it. I like it and I don't like it. I appreciate the ease that this is providing for my clients during this time, that they have a way to connect with me. But I also want to acknowledge that making this shift suddenly can be hard for a lot of us. And it can bring up questions about, well, how does my practice look? I never imagined that I was going to have to turn my apartment or my home or my residence into an office that's, like Anthony was saying, like you were saying, into like I have to sit here and this is my office for
same spot. Yeah.
Same spot. Yeah. How does that feel to do that?
It feels horrible. It feels very horrible to a particular point, right? And I say horrible because it's really tough to just find joy in sitting in that same spot. I've tried to have different parts of the desk or the table or wherever I was to be able to move stuff around. And that's been that keeps me a little busy, but it's monotonous, right? I miss the in-person connection that I was having during therapy or during class or during my own classes, right? It's been really rough. And when you talk about radical changes to the profession, this might be a little bit of a departure from where you were, but I think that it might have gotten easier to actually do some relational work, but also harder at the same time, right? Because people's access to services are dependent on resources. And while that was always something that we were worried about, I know a lot of interns were worried, well, this person may need this resource and that resource, and each agency or wherever they work can help get those things, but it's a bigger hurdle to get over if they need a computer or money for internet or any of those particular things. But at the same time, you have access to people in their homes, and it's so much easier to do relational work.
Yeah. That's a good point. That thing when couples come to the office and you kind of see which furniture they're going to use. Are they going to use them? Are they going to sit on different chairs? Mm-hmm. Or if there's one couch, are they going to try to be at the edges of the couch? So I do that same assessment, but it's if they're logging on using the same computer, or if they're logging on using two.
This is true. This is very.
I'm like, yo, it's couples therapy. Why are you all logging on from different? I guess they're social distancing too.
In the house, they're around each other, so it shouldn't matter. But
I don't know. It might depend on the circumstances for that particular family, but but I'm always impressed when I'm like, oh, you logged on together in the same computer.
I happen to think, I've been thinking about this for a little bit, but doing any kind of relational work, couples and family, the intensity is already there because, getting people to be huddled together in a screen in a specific way, they're close, they're intimate. And so a lot of the change, a lot of the exertion, right, that you, no matter what modality that you use, you want to break the cycle that the couple is in or the family is in, right? And the intensity's there already. So it's kind of cool in a way that this setup allows for things to be done in such a way that you don't have to try as hard. Mm-hmm. The people are closer together, and even if they're like you're saying, in different rooms and different computers, that's such a good question. Hey, you're on different computers in different rooms. Yeah, what's that about? That's so assessment diagnostic wise, but I don't know. It's made it so easier to me to do relational work.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important right now for us to have some reframes about the benefits of this. If we ever had an opportunity to test both the challenges and the immense strengths that come from telehealth, this is the time to do that. Or this is the way for any Mandalorian fans out there. But yeah, this is the time to do that. And I don't know, we've been talking a little bit about the challenges, but I think it's cool that people have a way to connect with somebody who's supporting them while they're going through this and may otherwise feel alone. I know that my therapist, for example, has had to make changes as well. And he initially was like going to just continue to see people, and then it got more intense and stay-at-home order kind of got extended. And so now we're all kind of doing telehealth. What are the major changes that you're seeing in your practice, but also like maybe logistically speaking that maybe a lot of us are going through?
I think that I accept insurance. So that, to me, I think that was the biggest part that was really tough, right? It's like, how do I bill? What, is this going to deny? Can I tell people that telehealth is appropriate? Like, that was one of the bigger changes that was really difficult to navigate, and still to a point is difficult to navigate because, you have to go back over any kind of billing that's in the last 30 days, at least at this particular point, or 45 days, depending on how long the insurance company is like taking to process their claims, and like just making sure that there's extra tedious review around like, why is it denied? If it's denied, how do I get in contact with this person? Like, what does it need to be a modifier? Does it need to have a specific code? And like, insurance companies are funny to begin with, but like, that's something that's been on my mind a little bit, and it's been a little more tedious to deal with, is like making sure that the billing is in place, which adds another like layer of anxiety in general, right? Like before I was anxious around billing to begin with, but now it seems to be a little more like cautious around certain things. It's going to get better, but I mean, that's for me. I'm not sure about for you specifically.
Yeah, right now I'm not taking insurance, so that was a little bit easier of a switch. But there are some logistical changes, right? How are clients paying? What happens if they, don't have money right now? Like, those kind of questions come up, and also like, how do we blend our professionalism and our boundaries with a little bit of kindness? Or do late fees run the same? Exactly. Like those kind of things are totally, they're shifty right now. I think it's important for us to maintain some boundaries too, like so that we can have a little bit of a line of connection between the world before the pandemic and now. But I think they need to be reasonable, and they need to be with respect to kindness to our clients. Because what you were talking about and like all that extra concern of like, what's going to go on with the insurance, double checking, that sounds like a headache.
It is. It is.
So if there's anything to reduce that headache a little bit for my clients or me, and I'm just like one thing I've been doing, and this is not necessarily something that everybody should do, but if like clients like didn't get the Zoom link appropriately, like, or something weird like that, like the first time or some emergency comes up because of their quarantining and it's related to that, or somebody gets sick, I'm not going to charge them a late fee, and be like, hey, it's within my 24-hour period. You know what I mean? If they're like trying their best, like, we had to go to the hospital, or, somebody in my family, like, hopefully we have that kindness anyway, but.
It's true. And I would add that like the days blend into each other, right? And if we're all, and so even though like you may get this alert, right? I think a lot of us use simple practice, but you may get, you get an alert 24 hours before. People still, and I understand it, right? Like the days blend in. It's like, oh, I didn't even know that was Thursday. Like, and I think we were saying about kindness. I think that is really important. I do have a question for you though. What do you think about extending out one's rates that they offer, reduced fees? Like, do you think that's an ethical thing that we should do because of the changes in our profession?
I mean, my heart says yes. And I know that has to be managed next to our own goals in the profession. But I don't know. I think this has been a time where I've been thinking about power, and I've been thinking about privilege. And I understand that the viability of our professions matter. I totally do. But I try to remember the power dynamics, and I try to remember that clients are paying us, and that there are certain clients that, because of insurance, because of how much therapy costs, because of how much regular therapy costs, that it is not like this pandemic, economically speaking, is not an equal opportunity offender. it's been hurting some people way more. And so
Sure.
when I'm working with people who, had a hard time paying for sessions, if they need to come every 2 weeks instead of every week, or, I think that stuff needs to be a larger professional discussion for sure. That's where my heart says. I think we got to, as a field, consider some ease. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think that making ourselves available to a particular degree for those who have lost insurance, right? And they still want to be present but can't pay. I think that's important. But I agree that there has to be a balance, right? I mean, we have to make sure that our livelihood is protected, right? Which is hard to when we are all caring. We're all in the caring profession, but we still want to make sure that people have access to those things. So, to a degree, maybe taking on more of a sliding scale, which a decrease of that. But I think it's important for us to make sure that we're not really stressing ourselves in a way that creates more issues around income.
Yeah.
And that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You pointed out the the importance of also making sure that our practices are our own viability and our own practices, and it might be tempting to say to oneself, well, my practice isn't running as well as I would like, or maybe some of us are thriving during this time. Maybe we've been working from home, and maybe telehealth is where we're headed, or maybe it's helping us have more clients during this time. So I want to respect that. But I know a lot of us are also maybe wondering, shoot, am I just not good at running my practice? It's really easy to take on that narrative. And so I want to, if my students are here, they all know that I'm a narrative therapy geek. So I'm going to impose it into this conversation. You know that I'm a narrative therapy geek, Anthony. Do you? Do you know me well enough?
Oh, of course. Come on now. We do everything. We're like Batman and Robin Jr. So,
Who's Batman?
I don't know. Maybe you might be Batman.
It depends on the night.
This is true. What we're talking about.
Okay. Well, with respect to that, I think it's important to not patronize oneself. Oh, shoot, my practice isn't running well. This has hit all of us, and we're all having to transition. And as we know about lifespan development, when you're in transition, you're often also in a little bit of crisis or chaos. Your life is shifting, your development, whether it's professional development, your family's development, your personal development, all gets shifted around, and you have to reorient. So it is the worst time to do a large evaluation and judgment about how good you are as a professional. It's hard enough to do the upkeep and figure out okay, I was making this much money before, this is how much money I'm making now, to kind of think about all that. And on top of that, to have a shame narrative that oh, I must suck with my profession right now because I'm not seeing enough clients, or, I'm not running my practice the way that I should, or I didn't check on that other thing, I think it's good for us to kind of widen our story a little bit beyond some of those judgments. That we're doing our best, that it's important to change how we take care of our practice, that it's important to change how we tend to our clients, not that we're doing a good or bad job, and kind of existing in that binary. But I felt like it was important to say to myself and to all of you. I don't know what you think about that, Anthony.
No, I definitely agree with that. I wouldn't add or take away anything from that.
Yeah. How are you? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to shift into something else possibly, but you said about crisis. And I think that one of the radical changes to our profession is that we've gotten good at being able to now deal with crises. We can do systemic work. We're trained to do systemic work in such a specialized way. But sometimes when it comes to crisis, we don't train as well as we probably need to, as some of the other professions do. And so this has kind of caused us to kind of look at well, how do we do all this stuff, all these things? How are we able to kind of, manage these things in a particular way that still protects us as individuals, but also helps the systems that we're treating. So I do just want to acknowledge that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in the transitional crisis, definitely, for sure. How are you, let me ask you this, how are you, okay, if I'm comparing this to my in-person practicing, right, and a client is maybe 5 minutes late in the session, or maybe they have to cancel, I would have a natural, what was going on last week, the next session, or I might call them if it's very not customary of them to
Mm-hmm.
miss, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But how are you checking on your clients during this time? Either the ones that you're seeing or maybe that ones that are taking a little bit of a hiatus. Like, what are the ways that we should be checking on our clients, maybe in creative ways during this time?
I think that's a really good question. So, in general, I have a phone line that's dedicated to all of my private practice and client contact. And so, for me, I think that I allow texting in a certain boundary, right? But I go over that to begin with. Like, I'm not going to give like clinical conversation and therapy over text, right? Like, if you need to touch base, that's one part. So a lot of people have been just texting in like, hey, do we still have an appointment? Or, my insurance didn't change, or, hey, my insurance did change, right? Or I don't have insurance anymore. So I
Right.
encourage a boundaried conversation with them via text or phone. And then, like you said, like around keeping in contact with them around perhaps they might show up late or, not at all. Like, I think a phone call, I generally send an email, right? Because maybe they're ashamed. Maybe they don't have the money. Maybe something changed, right? Maybe they forgot. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So an email usually is my like nice check-in. And
Yeah.
even some clients, I have a client that is on the front lines working, but he comes in intermittently. And part of my way of like being to check in and let him know that I'm available is literally just to send an email. Hey, just think about you, making sure that you're okay. Let me know if there's anything that you might need, right? And being available, I think, is like the biggest part, right? In a way that they feel free to be able to check in with me if they choose to or not, right? Phone might be too much. Text definitely, because they'll feel like pressure to be able to like text back. But an email is always the nice distance I feel like that's appropriate, right? And that they're used to and accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
But what about you?
Well, I really like that term that you use, like a boundary discussion or boundary connection. So that way we're still honoring like, all the parameters of this, but we're still kind of checking in as necessary. And I feel, I personally feel that advocacy for our clients' health is part of therapy. And I think part of that is checking in a little bit beyond our therapy office. I know that needs to be within reason and it needs to be professional. And I think during this time, like you said, I think email is the way that I plan to continue going about it and just seeing how people are. And that includes clients that are waiting, who prefer to wait until this pandemic is over before they do therapy. Maybe they don't want to do telehealth. Maybe they don't have the resources, There's been a larger conversation about internet and computers being a utility, like a necessary utility. And what happens if we all have to switch online? The whole world has to pay their bills that way, and people don't have computers. It reinforces the economic power dynamics that are there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. Email.
It's true. It's true. Could I just bring up something too about the radical changes? I think that's a little more.
You don't gotta ask.
Okay, I'm just so. I've been thinking about this, and I think that this change into, the stay-at-home orders and social distancing and things like that. I think that number one, it really highlights, at least in this country, right, that we are more relational than we like to think, which I think is a boon to our field, right? Because the way of traditional, psychotherapy is the individual aspects. Even we're medical model based. That's why we diagnose. That's why we do all these things. But like the need for people to be social is a human one, right? And it transcends nations and politics and things like that. And our need to be connected is really essential. And I think that the stay-at-home orders obviously are for protection, but I think it highlights the fact that it provides legitimacy to our field and what we do and how we do it. And I don't know if we've gotten a chance to talk a lot about that, right? Like why people are suffering for a lot of issues, but I mean, relational, we need each other. We need that social contact. Even if we're introverts, right? We need that ability to be able to connect with others. What are your thoughts on that? Am I making this too bigger than it needs to be, or?
No, and I think we're going to touch on that earlier when we talk about the importance of our own personal connections with others right now during this time. But I think that's true with respect to practice for our clients, like, being able to I know, like, I hate Zoom. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, if I didn't before, like last Tuesday, listen, Anthony, last Tuesday, okay, I was on Zoom call from 9. I mean, it wasn't that early. It was 9:45 to noon for student interviews. Then I scored with a colleague those interviews from 12 to 1. Then I had a faculty meeting from 1 to 3. And then I had to teach a class from 3:30 to 6:30. And then you and I taught that class from 7 to 10.
Yeah.
And then I think we debriefed on Zoom afterwards for like a hot second. And that was like 12 hours of Zoom. So if I didn't hate Zoom before, I definitely hate it after last Tuesday. Like, I'm not a big fan. But I know the other side of that is that when people see us, it's an olive branch. If they don't have human connection right now, just being able to see another human being talk to you can be that. But I think that reflects the larger need. It's just we need to be around each other as a public. It's part of our lifeblood. It's part of how we grow, and that's true for introverts too. Like, I've heard some of my introverted friends. I'm not. I don't know what that's like.
It's pretty well. I like it. It's pretty fun. But
you like it. Say that, like, yo, I like spending time alone, but not every day, all the time. And like the promise of being inside, for the next God knows when, is a little bit of a different question than that. And we all need interaction as part of our growth. So I think that's what you're saying is really important. I also want to acknowledge too, and we'll get to more questions later, that I know we know that there are certain parameters that you have to work within regarding like insurance or like the practice that you might work at or how your practice is set up. My recommendation or our recommendation is to make sure that you do your homework about like some flex that some insurances might be providing right now. We know that if you have like it's not always easy to, change if your clients were using insurance and aren't. But I think that's a different paradigm than being responsive to some of your clients don't have insurance anymore, right?
Which is where the whole conversation around sliding fee comes in, right? Like, do we send that or not? But I also want to recognize about, like, again, interns and master's program right now and associate levels, right, that have private practice, right? That's a huge radical change to them. I don't know what I would have done if I were like in my master's program and this happened. Like, it's a scary time knowing that, yes, it's been easier to do relational work, but at the same time, many of the interns that are at any of the agencies, like, it's been really tough to get hours, like super tough to get hours, because it's not that necessarily some of the families don't have access. Yes, it is sometimes, but like the agencies might have been slow to get on to do what they needed to do. So like, that's a huge radical change that's been happening around like how are we supporting like, our interns, our students in a particular way that lets them feel like grateful and happy and like it was a good decision to go into a master's program for therapy, right? Like, no one could have seen this coming, but I'm sure the impact is real. And likewise, the associates, right? Their associates in our state are allowed to practice independently. And they may not have insurance to fall back on, right? And I think it's important just to kind of see that as like perhaps a real issue, right? That the shrinking pool of individuals that they can see, right? Which are obviously cash paying, they may not be able to do that. So it's been a big change. I just want to kind of put that out there too, that we've been talking a lot about the clinical individuals, right, that have been licensed, but the other impacts too are interns and associate levels.
I saw that with respect to like, well, first of all, I hope that this presentation is helping everyone feel like they made the right decision if they're still, whether you're 40 years into the field or whether you're still in school, like, we hope we're reinforcing your pride to be part of this field. And, I'm proud to be part of this field. And I think one of the things that's been helpful during this time is I saw that some of the webinars about like switching to telehealth or just like learning how to do telehealth, refreshers on that for a lot of people and trainings on that have been available. So I went through LMFT. My practice is Northwest relationships. We have, we function through Simple Practice. And so I know that they offered one that's for free right now for people who are running.
SAMHSA has some that's on the WAF website.
It's at SAMHSA?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can open the chat box right now temporarily just to kind of see what other webinars people know about so we can kind of share them with each other. But yeah, I know that that's really useful. I think like even if you got your CEs or whatever, like it might be an ethical thing to just kind of like sit down for an hour, like, you know, especially if the one that you have access to is like reduced free or fee or free. Just, you know, do some like dishes and put that thing on, like, or, you know, clean up your apartment or residence and put that thing on and let it run for an hour. It'll give you some good tips on how to tend to, you know, this change to online. Okay, we got some that came up.
Person-centered tech.
Yeah, person-centered tech.
PESI is offering a free course on telehealth. AMFT at Home series, especially yesterday, was very well done, offering 1 hour CEU credits free of charge. We love free of charge CEUs.
Like this one, like these, like today. So I'm gonna type these up too for people to look up. AMFT, and then what's you said SAMHSA, right? SA.
Zain, do you want me to open this to everybody, the chat to everybody, so they can all see it?
Yeah, sure.
Right now it's just open to you guys.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's keep it the way it is. I'm just gonna name them. So we said person-centered tech, PESI. What else? Simple
AMFT,
practice.
Simple practice.
AMFT and SAM. SAMHSA. This is embarrassing because I was a minority fellow through SAMHSA too.
Oh, that is terrible.
I should know.
You should know. So
I mean, the acronyms I need to know are WAMFT and MF and MFP.
It's SAM.
Oh, we got it. It's there. Okay.
Everyone is like, fail. You all fail. Terrible.
WMHCA is offering one on telehealth and ethics. Their platform. So CPH and Associates, I imagine that they will have good recommendations too, just for like liability's sake. Because I think part of those webinars have to do also with keeping ethical during this time. Like if you're gonna be working with a client and you're peering into their home, like are there kids running around? Are there other people coming in? Is like the Grubhub dude like in the, or person like in the, you know, like right around the corner. But my clients have, you know, wanted to respect their own privacy, you know, around that. And we've been able to kind of make sure of that. But if, you know, it hasn't been talked about, webinars might be a good refresher about how to keep ethical during that time. Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. And yeah, feel free to bring some of your suggestions to when we have breakout rooms. And it looks like PESI is also offering a special certification program for telehealth and clinical anxiety treatment. Wow, lots of CEUs for that one too. So that's good.
Period.
Yeah. And I saw in general that a lot of like, there's been a lot of like maybe, I don't know if like reduced fees, but like also maybe like bigger collections of CEUs, like you get 10 CEUs if you do this, or, you know, that sort of thing. So just CEUs in general right now might be a good thing to do if you're at home during this time. Not, you know, if you don't want to take clients every day, if you want to sit in the same spot like Anthony is every day, you might want to switch to a different room and put on some information about CEUs in general, not just in terms of switching to telehealth. I had a really quick thing before we, oh yeah, some of these do cost money, so not everything is free. It depends on which one, so make sure you look that up, depending on the different organization that you're getting it through. But I had a student say something really interesting to me about taking different classes and setting up different parts of your residence, like different corners of your space, to just reflect like a different part of your professional life. I might be too lazy to do that. And I might be too messy to do that. But I think that that's a great idea. Like if that's something that will help you shift gears, you know, moving to a different chair, a different room, a different corner, a different lighting, depending on the time of day. That may be another cool way to manage your practice right now. All right, I got this type of client. Okay, so I'm going to be in this corner. Just the self-care, about, getting ready for each case. I know that when I'm in person, I like to maybe sometimes take a lunch hour or take a deep breath. So we need to be creative about how we do those in between moments at home.
Agreed. I do want to call out, so we got a notification on Bessel van der Kolk's 30-minute trauma and COVID presentation via PESI, and it was free. It was very helpful. Bessel van der Kolk, they wrote a very good book around trauma, so well written. So I would definitely believe that yeah, that's probably a good training too. So I just want to call that out.
We'll close the chat for now, and we'll come back to that type of dialogue again if need to be during the question and answer, and also our breakout rooms if it's sort of more discussion on that. But let's switch gears now.
We should probably pick it up, but I like
well, you know us.
So validating less productivity. This really resonates. This topic really resonates with me. For me, I really love making sure no matter what I'm doing, whether it's teaching or seeing clients or my own schoolwork, that I'm giving all, right? You just get everything, and I'm going to do the best and try to be the best at it. But this is something that's come up and that I've personally struggled with, and I've seen some of my students struggle with, and I've heard some of my supervisees struggle with, where it's well, I feel like I'm not doing anything. And, I think it's important to kind of validate the fact that it is okay to have less productivity because we are pretty much entrenched in a global pandemic, right? Which means that obviously that we're not going to be able to move around and do the things that we want to do like we normally do, right? But the other part is that I think this speaks to validating the needs of where people are, right? And right now, while we can still tend to anxiety and depression and many of the other presenting issues that are happening, the environment and the context of which people are in have shifted, right? Which means we have to shift. So some of the conversations that I've been having around kids is do you like school? Are you sad school is not in physical session, right? That you have to be on Zoom. What does that look like for you, right? And knowing that some kids are I don't like school, but I miss my friends, right? And how am I validating that? How am I just holding that in a particular way that allows parents and families to just be okay with that, right? Instead of well, you should like school and this is how you it does not have to be that deep, right? And that us shifting ourselves in a particular way to validate that lesser intensity, if you will, I think is just as important, if not needed. What would you say?
Well, I mean, I'm really glad that we kind of siphoned off the practice sort of part of this conversation in the beginning and did that thoroughly, because we're talking about this as human beings. If you're less productive right now, you don't just have, I mean, I've seen a lot of people talking about, we have the time for our arts and crafts now. We have time for students to spend more time on homework or something like that. You don't just have more time. There's also a question of energy. And there's also a question of how are you moving around right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we got to validate this idea of less productivity. I know when I was in grading papers, if I can go to a coffee shop, if I can go somewhere, I can switch gears, I can grade 8 to 10, papers a day. And I would sit here and quarantine. Yeah, I was sitting in quarantine with these grand plans of man, I'm going to give this feedback to all these students. And I'd get halfway through the day and I'd be I've read 3 sentences. And then I would shame myself, what's wrong with my brain, right? But the truth is when you're sitting in one spot, it does something to your body. And we just as human beings, instead of dissociating from the truth of what's happening to us, it's important for us to just validate it. You might be less productive right now, and maybe not in all facets of your life are you going to be the most productive, if we could say it another way, yeah.
It's true. And I mean, in all of us honoring the stay-at-home order, right, and as much as we can, because some people go out, you're supposed to go out for a walk, or you might go out for a run, or something along those lines, right, to go outside for physical activity. Most of us are just in the same space, right, and that's tiring, right, and it's gonna eat at our productivity. We normally we have these transitions and boundaries, like you were saying before, around You know, if I went to my practice, I was specifically at my practice. And if I went to school, it was at specifically my school. If I did this, there were these boundaries and transitions that we all had, whether we or the bus or the train or the ferry or, you know, drove in or out. Like we had time to like decompress from these particular activities, and that helped us stay boundaried, right? But like now, like everything is piled. There aren't any boundaries in a particular way that like honor transitions that we need to do. And that cuts down on our ability to be productive, I think. And it's just important to really talk, just to validate that part of our lives, like you're saying. Like, and it's tough. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I definitely miss the podcasts I used to listen to. I'm definitely somebody that's like, you know, I listen to nostalgic 90s music on my way to, you know, therapy office and, you know, back home. But no, we're human beings too as therapists. And it's, you know, just to kind of use that CBT language, like it is probably a negative automatic thought. If you're sitting there like, I'm not good enough in my practice right now. Like I'm definitely like failing right now. You know, I'm not doing enough. All right. And I know it's easy to do because we can like sink into the Netflix hole, the rabbit hole of that or something. But, you know, there's a lot, and we might be worried about our family members. We might be worried about like prolonged time alone. I know for me, like there's a lot of different stuff that might be weighing on us. And on top of that, you know, going back to what we were saying in the last slide, like, yeah, are you working hard enough? Like, are you doing enough? Like, you have a free day Wednesday. Why didn't you just use that whole day for new clients? And when you were asked to take on new clients, why didn't you just say yes? And also, what about weekends? Like, and I think like that needs to change a little bit. Like, if you are not, like, you're feeling that you're not productive, it's not something wrong with you. Like, you're a human being, and using more CBT language, people are going to think like CBT is my favorite theory now. It's not, it's narrative, and person of the therapist, you know, like we don't just work, right? You also have a body that needs to function, that's related to your energy, your thought, the way that you feel, the way you interact with other people, and they're all in relation to each other. So this idea that, you know, your body can sort of sit still and you can just be as productive as you were when you were making those shifts. Like Anthony, you were talking about like those routines that are built in. Yeah, and then like if you're sitting in one place and then you're trying to drink coffee, you might think that's going to make you more alert, but actually you're dehydrating yourself. You're sitting in one spot, like, yo, it's like okay to be a little bit less productive right now and just kind of normalizing that.
Hydration.
Yeah, drink water. That's important. But maybe don't drink a lot of water and say, now I'm definitely going to be able to take on 1 million more clients. Like, it's not just time, and we don't just work. We're human beings, and we need to do that. Plus, the more that you're able to validate less productivity, when clients come to you and they're like, yo, this is hard for me right now, sometimes the pace, like, this is just an important thing too. And I don't mean to make it just about our practices, but when our clients show up and let's say there isn't like that much progress between last week and this week, or between the last session and this session, sometimes our want to be for them to change, which sounds great, can morph into like a lack of ease that they're not changing.
Sure.
And we can project onto our clients that they're not being productive enough. And sometimes that reflects how hard we are on ourselves.
Sure.
So the more that we're in touch with like, yo, this is hard, and we need to be just acknowledging that we can't be like fully productive every day the same way, then when clients show up, not just during this pandemic, but afterwards too, and they're like, this is hard, change is hard, my relationship is going through a tough time right now, or family life is hard, or, you know, whatever, my job is hard, then we're not just like mistaking our want for their change with like this like haste that's coming from our own anxiety as professionals. So this is a really important time to personally and professionally slow the fuck down. Like, it's okay. It is okay to not, I mean, with respect to, I know we got to pay bills and everything like that, but slow down. Like,
I think, likewise, I think it's also important to just hold the fact that, again, what we're dealing with is intense, right? And if we're dealing with these intense things, and these intense families and couples and individuals, it's going to take more of our energy. I think, again, it's okay to say, like, okay, we can't make that much movement, right? Like, it takes a lot more energy to do that. Like, I agree with you. We may have more time, right, and more days open because we don't have to travel here and there. But like, do we? I don't think we do. I think that's just a myth that, like, you know, we have all this time to do stuff, but we're, you know, our self-care does not come as first, right? And our need to have transitions and boundaries. So I'm with
For
you.
sure. Yeah, it seems like a matter of privilege too. I saw this drawing where there's all these people kind of doing these amazing things in quarantine. Like one person's playing a violin, the other person's like, you know, all this kind of stuff. And for a lot of people, though, this has enhanced crises that have already been there and
Sure.
intensified that and made their jobs more unstable and laid off a lot of people. So their time is spent surviving. And so, you know, just to reflect that, I think is going to be important. How are you setting your personal boundaries during this time to kind of honor that?
That is a good question. Personal boundaries. Well, number one, I don't have time because, I mean, you know the life of a doc student, right?
Yeah.
So, but I try to make sure that, like, someone said something around, like, ensuring that I, like, when I go from transitioning from one thing to another, like, I just have, like, a transition, like, activity where some of that might be exercise, some of that might be going to get something to eat, some of that might be going to go take a walk, right? Go out, come back, and then reset, which has been really helpful in a way to kind of have some boundaries around that. I mean, there are some individuals that I will see in my office, like very rarely each week. So that's been also kind of a good way to do that. And I will walk versus like drive, but I can walk to my practice anyway. But that has been helping kind of keep boundaries in place, which has been really helpful around just keeping me sane, going between one activity and the other. What about you? What have you been able to do?
A lot of different things. I'm definitely, and we'll talk about this in other slides too, like what to do, you know, during this time to take care of yourself. One thing is I'm trying not to evaluate the things that I don't do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to take sort of like a inventory of what I am doing. I'm trying to change the game. And that's something I needed to do anyway in my life. But like, what did I do during this day that was important rather than what am I not doing? So I'm trying to change the paradigm. That's one thing. And I've been pretty successful at it. It's actually helping me sleep with less anxiety and, you know, wake up the next day with less anxiety. It's been good. And then also I'm trying to like not just digest everything I see on social media as like a standard for like how I could be living my life. So for example,
Instagram.
Yeah, like okay, like fasting started yesterday for Muslims, and like it's like there's, you know, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this idea that it's, you know, oh, it'll be a time for self-reflection and we'll be in our houses. But I miss being out there. Like I miss being out there breaking bread with different people when the fast is over. I miss being, you know, doing my routines and night prayers and things like that. And everyone has their own personal life where they're missing some things right now and they're feeling the weight of that. So when I'm on social media and I see like, oh, actually, this is all great. Like this is all fantastic. And I'm like, I don't know. I think like that's, you know, it depends like how far we take that idea. I think it's good to reframe and be strengths-based to a degree,
Sure.
but not in such a way to dissociate from like what's actually happening to your body. Like I don't like, it's good to be positive, but I don't think it's so great to be dissociative from that like idea of, so I'm very careful about what I digest when it comes to social media messaging about how to navigate the pandemic and everything is fine, you know, that sort of thing.
Agreed. No argument here.
Let's switch gears. Okay.
Next one.
Intentional connectedness. Okay. I am all about this as an extrovert, but I think in general, we talked about how people need this. And so it's important to be connected and make time for it. Like make time for it, you know, give energy to it. Whether that's with family, friends, chosen family. You know, I guess I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing, and I'm really curious to know what you're doing, Anthony, as well. But I have had probably more phone calls than I've ever had. I don't know. It's hard to measure it, like, you know, compared to other parts of my life. And I'm enjoying that. Like, I'm thoroughly enjoying that. because these are, we always say like, oh, what if we had time to connect with people? But right now there's like a really important reason to connect with people, to see if people are okay and how they're navigating. I like reconnected with a cousin I haven't talked to in years, like, and then yesterday she sent me a box of cookies from my front door. And I'm like, see, this is what happens when you connect with people. Like, you just get the roots of it. But I think it's really valuable. And one of the things that I've been doing is if somebody says, hey, I'm having a virtual birthday party, I'm like, yes. If somebody says we're having an alumni like virtual hangout, I'm like, yes. If somebody wants to play a game with me on that house party app, I'm like, yes. And I'm just saying no to those things a little bit less. This really puts into perspective when people connect through online gaming. I don't know. I think intentional time away by yourself, intentional time with family, like all the things, connect to yourself and others. I think it's so important. And sometimes as professionals, we're so other oriented that we forget that our connections matter too, right? This is, I don't know. I'm all about it. I think this is something we got to prioritize right now.
I like that, but that we're on that, we are like the opposite. Like I'm pretty introverted individual. So like there's a level of me like really thriving with the stay at home. Like I'm like, okay, I don't have to really talk to many people. So I like it, but I do like also this notion of being intensely connected, because I get a chance to really choose which people I want to talk to and how I'm going to spend that time. And that has been very, like, I think, there's a level of like wellness that's like come out of that for me. Specifically, I've been able to connect with some of my siblings in such a specific way that like has added to like my like happiness, which has been really great to see. I wouldn't go so far about like seeing cousins and things like that, but I have reached out to a lot of like my professional mentors and friends and things like that I haven't gotten a chance to just talk. And like it's been really good to be able to say like, I'm going to choose to do this in a particular way and connect with these people in a way. I think that makes sense. I would love, perhaps, I shouldn't say that. It would be nice perhaps if I did enjoy like Zoom parties and stuff like that, but that's the part of Zoom I don't like. I can't.
I see.
Like,
yeah.
There's way too many people that I still feel like, oof, no. But I think that like my way of being intentional around who I choose to connect with at this point have been on a smaller scale, and that works for me, right? And I think that like when you were talking about like this social need and this social connection, and you just saying yes to more things, I think that's good. That allows you to still like be fed in a particular way, like spirit-wise, that means something for you, right? And I'm trying to do that same thing, honor that part of me too, but like it just looks different. And I'm okay with it too, right? Like, if anything, it makes me happy that I have a lot more control over who I'm talking to socially versus not. So
yeah, definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks for choosing me too, sir. Thanks for choosing me.
We're Batman and Robin Jr. Or did we not say this?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for choosing me. Since you're being intentional, I feel honored that I'm part of that group of people that you're being intentionally connected with. I guess we have to be. Like sometimes too, but I know we talk beyond that. I think that's a good way to put it. I feel like for me, I'm saying yes as an intentional decision, and what I'm hearing you say is like you're being thoughtful about which people you connect with during this time. And like even as somebody who like I feel like I'm talking to everybody. Like I'm pretty sure a friend requested some girl I had a crush on in like 9th grade.
Why?
Just to see if she's like, managing the pandemic or something. I don't know. But like, I'm just like, saying hi to everybody out there and making sure that everyone's okay. And I've been like reconnecting with college roommates and things like that. But I think like some of them fall by the wayside. And then I'm like, it's just a check-in, and I'm, afterwards I'm being intentional about who I talk to more regularly. And I think that's definitely an important choice. But I think what can't be done right now is like, if we have to be alone, you have to approximate connections in a way that makes sense to you personally.
Sure.
And whether that's like even looking at somebody else's art, or if it's making art and sharing it with other people to connect it with other people. I've been doing that a little bit. That's been super awesome. Sure. Thank you for everybody who's been tuning in on Facebook, watching my jams. But I've been watching other people's art, and I'm definitely gonna like download a game if I can. And like, not everybody has these options either. It really depends on the resources that you have. But I definitely think that keeping lines open for connection that makes sense to you is something we cannot ignore right now. Like, it is a need. It is like something that's going to keep you emotionally hydrated. I think it's important. And then, like you said, time away too. Like, if you've had enough of some people that you're locked up with, like, time away is part of that connectedness paradigm as well, like connection to yourself.
I agree. I agree. Couples, it's come up with a lot of couples, like how are you negotiating the need for space and how are you negotiating the need to be together? And what does that look like, right? Like, I'm sure everyone has had that conversation with couples they've been.
And it looks mutually exclusive, but it's not, right? Like, we are self and other, and this is a time where we have to reconcile with that a little bit more actively throughout the day, and got to do both. It's a both and self and other.
Agreed.
Alrighty.
Resist professional silos. I like the font on that, how big and bold you made that.
Thank you.
Like, boom, right there. So I think that, I think about like my own professional like journey so far is that, like, there was school, like undergrad, master's program, did a lot of agency work like, everyone else does, right? Like, and, the goal was to be in private practice. Well, at that time in Pennsylvania, you couldn't do private practice, or Philadelphia, New Jersey, you can't do private practice until you were licensed. So that was always like that gold standard to get there. And so, getting there meant like that I finally made it. I could accept insurance if I wanted to. I could have a particular price if I wanted to for my services. Like, it really was such an accomplishment. But like, we go into private practice, most of us, right? And it's lonely, right? And yes, there are options to be able to have like professional supervision groups and things like that. But I think that the loneliness, the professional loneliness that can happen during this time really gets solidified because we're pushed to be at home or one specific space, and we're spending a lot of our energy with our clients, with ourselves, trying to keep ourselves afloat, or keep our practices like attended to in a particular way. And honestly, dealing with clients that have been in crisis, right, for a long time now. But we have to be able to connect with each other in a particular way. I think that will like normalize what's happening for us. And I think that seeking supervision, seeking the conversation with some of our colleagues is like even more so needed, because we're all having the same probably conversations with clients over and over again. And who are we talking to about like how it feels, right? That we're having this monotonous conversation around COVID. Like I started saying in the first couple weeks to some of my clients, right? Like, we get one COVID joke per session, right? Because it permeates like everything that we've been talking about, rightfully so. But like outside of that client like therapist dynamic, like we ourselves keep having that conversation over and over with each client. And like, where do we go, right? To kind of like just dump that emotional things of how hard it is to hold all those things, how hard it is to hold all these stories. Like, for example, I'm sure a lot of us have heard from some of our clients that like, I lost my job, or I'm scared of losing my job. Like, and we do our basic attending skills of like sitting with a person, joining with them, validating that struggle. But like, what do you do after that? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, and to hear that story over and over again, right? Like, that's pretty tough, which is why the resisting professional silos, like we can't keep ourselves separate. We need to be able to connect with our colleagues and, our supervisors in a way that kind of just like give us a chance to be able to talk about it and say, this crap really sucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This might be, I don't know, I think that's so important that you're bringing that up, because I'm thinking about like when I was in school at Michigan State, there were two major like gold standards about like how to be a good MFT. Mm-hmm. And one of them was become a tenure professor somewhere. And the other one is have a viable practice, private practice, and make sure that it's thriving, right? And both of those can be like lots of time alone in an office and lots of time left alone with your own thoughts. And this is not, and to me, this is distinct from what we talked about in the last slide, which is like the connectedness, the personal connectedness. It's distinct because I think it keeps therapists ethical to have at least one or two mentors or colleagues that they keep on the phone with them throughout their careers or something like this idea that, you know, you're just gonna, you know, have a million clients and you've got to figure it out. Like, honestly, keeping connection with other people will keep you fresh. It'll keep you educated. It'll keep you interested in theories that are morphing, changing, new authors. It'll help you understand new changes logistically to the field. If we're kind of just like alone and something happens with regard to liability, that's a problem. But then in addition to the professional concerns about that, there's also like personal wellness. Like, I know when I go through really difficult cases, I need to call, I'm going to do a plug here. My mentor, Kathleen Jager, I continue to talk to her. Like, she's a good friend of mine, and I learned so much from her that I did not learn in the classroom. She was my teacher too, but we also did like Family Zain transition program in Ingham County, in Lansing, and like the court system. And you know, afterwards, when I moved and when I, you know, started to work in different agency settings, different practices, I keep her on the phone, like, you know, and I don't, like, if she's not listed as my supervisor, I obviously won't talk to her about like identifiable things, but I might call her and say, I have a hard case. What do you do when you have a hard case? And I don't necessarily need an answer per se, but I just need the validation. Somebody else out there also went through a hard case. And during this pandemic, like, especially, like, you're not alone in this field. Like, I hope that today is showing you also, like, there are like 124 participants here. So when we like leave this webinar, or when this pandemic dies down a little bit, like, call somebody up. Like, even if you don't need specific advice about something, call somebody up, vent about something. Like, I think it's so important. And if you are primarily going to do private practice, then it's all the more important that you keep in contact with colleagues in other ways and that you're intentional about that. I think we ignore that too much. And I think it's part of our ignorance of our own self-care. We're so other-centered, a lot of us, that, you know, we skip our professional needs. It's not just, it's not this selfish thing. It'll actually keep you, I think it'll keep you ethical as well.
Yeah, so I love that. And I agree that I think that there is an ethical element to us being able to consult with other people. And, oh, you want me to, okay, just kidding.
It was an accident.
I know. Yeah, I agree that when I am able to speak with my own supervisor or connect with my professional like colleagues and mentors and things like that, like, there's a rejuvenation that happens, right? And I think that, like, again, I think this goes back to us being a relational field. Like, it's essential to what we do, and honoring that part of us. And it's important to kind of have different perspectives on different things that we're doing and being updated on things. But I think also, like, this is also a self-plug for RAMP, but like, the networking groups are very important, right? Because you get a chance to just be around other like-minded individual people that are doing some highly good relational work, right? And can add different like dimensions and like thoughts and unseen things, right, that we're doing, and say like, hey, what about this? What about that? Like, or this is a new training that came out, or, you know, like, how are you feeling, right? And it's to me, I think walking to a room of MFTs or being MFTs is a special thing that kind of happens for me, because like that professional persona and identity is really validated in a way that, like, that language, right? Like, if I get around, I'm start talking systems, you understand exactly what I'm talking about, right? I don't have to be like, well, you know, and this is how people communicate. Like, we just know already, right? Like, that this is how we talk, this is how we treat people. So I think it's really important and ethically for us to make sure that we are, you know, we have some boundaries in place that way we also can be supported in a way that really helps us grow and thrive where we are.
I think that pairs, what you just said pairs really nicely with what we talked about earlier about validating less productivity, because if you're just like, hey, you know what, I can just schedule all these clients, then all these clients are doubling as this blockade from you and your other ways of surviving right now, like professionally. all these clients that you're seeing, you have no time to call your colleagues up to decompress about anything that's going on. And, really bad therapy can happen during burnout, because it's harder to check your countertransference. It's harder to be attuned to yourself. It's harder to take a breath. So I hope that when we come out of the pandemic, that we remember to not be in these silos, man.
Agreed.
Okay. This makes you think of that song from Madagascar. I like to move it, move it.
Why? Okay, I guess it wouldn't be a presentation with you unless you had some cheesy jokes.
I have so many. I'm like keeping contained right now. Do you understand?
Yes, I do, and I appreciate it. But I guess you can let loose. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not going to get up and dance, but I could. No, I'm not going to. Actually, I did for a hot second on Facebook, and then I got flagged immediately. My dancing was too much for Facebook. I think it was the song I chose. It's a copywritten or something, but yes, okay. Like, this is the counterpoint to that sitting in one spot. Like, we're not able to, okay, true story. You and I have been talking about me getting to the gym, right? And you gave me a free pass to the gym, and I'm like, no, I don't have time. I'm teaching 5 classes. I can't do it. Whatever. I mean, I was planning to, but I kept kicking the can down the road. So right before the stay-at-home order happened, I joined a basketball league. All right. And listen, we lost by 35. I fell down. There were a lot of problems, but I got a sweat in, and it was awesome. And then the stay-at-home order happened. So now I'm like, shoot, how do I move, right? And so you hear me talking about dancing, and it's funny as that is, it's it's been a survival thing, in this apartment, because otherwise, at the end of the day, if you eat the wrong stuff, if you've been watching too many shows, you're sitting in one spot, seeing all these clients, you can feel kind of hot in your body at the end of the day, and not know how to sleep anymore, and those kind of things. So it's really important right now to, I think, physically decompress for your rest. But also find creative ways to keep moving. I've seen some families do stretching activities, in the mornings together, or workout routines. I have a colleague who's doing virtual runs where they sign up on some run, and it's actually in some different city, but the amount of miles that you run, everyone's kind of doing it together across the country in the same way. And you can choose your own route, and then you log it in. So I don't know. I really think that working out, dancing, moving, using your energy, using your body is an essential right now.
I agree. Just two quick things. We have about 15 minutes until question and answer.
Oh, okay.
Portion of that. So we want to kind of get to that. But also to everyone listening, if you're having some questions, in preparation for Q&A, start typing them up so we can start getting to them too. We want to make sure we can answer as many people's questions around things as possible. But yeah, move your body. I think, me, I love to move my body. I love to exercise. I think it's really cool and it's really meaningful. But just from a basic scientific standpoint, right? Atrophy, if you don't move our bodies, we lose energy in cells and muscle and tissue. And I think it's important to kind of make sure that we do that in a way that keeps our biochemistry going. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good lead into our next conversation, which is that we, and I'll let you take it away, but my last thought on the body thing is we are more present and clear and attentive towards our clients when we are physically refreshed.
Very true, very true. I mean, and obviously this whole conversation, this presentation comes down to how we framed it around the personal therapist framework. So, or self of the therapist, if you want to think about what that means. But basically, personal therapist is a framework of how we get to understand ourselves, right? There is the knowledge of oneself, the access of oneself, and the use of oneself. Basically, personal therapist it is a framework that was constructed by a person of color, Harry Aponte, in which he speaks about how we are able to know ourselves in a particular way, and how we show up in therapy, and what that means, how we care for ourselves, but basically that we are not blank slates, right? We all have our own experiences that happen, that have happened, that will happen, that do happen, and we bring that into the therapy room. The reason why it's important for us to know ourselves and to care for ourselves is because of that, right? That we sit with our clients, our experiences will come out. Sometimes they will be helpful in guiding treatment for us, and sometimes they might block us. But how well do we know ourselves enough to be able to understand that we should use ourselves in a particular way or not? And this doesn't just come down to self-disclosure, right? This comes down to us being able to like sit and intentionally understand what's happening for us in particular moments. Would you say anything else different for that? I know that you like to say something different sometimes when I'm talking about how the framework of POT comes.
No, we're pretty much aligned. That's why we teach that person to therapist track together. Hashtag Antioch University Seattle doing progressive things. But yeah, Harry Ponte, mic drop. Like, I think it's really important for us to, I mean, what stands out to me about what you're saying is that concept of like self-awareness. And I think that there's this age-old idea, I think an archaic idea that like you have to be complete and full as a person before you can ever work with your clients. And I think that's sort of it's misleading. We continue to work on ourselves. And I think a better framework is you're a wounded healer. Like, you're going through this pandemic too. You're having to shift around your practice. You're having to shift around things in your own family life. And you might have be going through crisis before this is happening. And your clients may be going through a myriad of other problems, some of which maybe you don't have to experience. But your attunement towards yourself, your access to the idea that suffering is a thing, needs to be a lived experience. Like, if you're trying to connect to your client in real time, and the idea is like, well, you need to be complete, or you need to be 100% differentiated, or you need to be like, really like, you know, never be able to make a mistake again. That doesn't keep you honest to how things actually are. So I think it's much more important to be like, this is what's going on. This is where I'm at right now. And my client has to deal with where I'm at right now. So how can I be accountable to that, slow down with it? And then one of those things is self-disclosure. Like, I was teaching a class, actually our class, but also the class before that. And I'm like, yo, this Zoom stuff is hard. And then for the first 5 minutes, students in the class were able to kind of name what they liked, what they didn't like about taking their classes on Zoom. Same thing with clients. And then it actually helped us really do more of a deep dive than I think we would have otherwise been able to if we didn't acknowledge that in the beginning. So sometimes we're, as therapists, afraid of that self-disclosure. But yo, I sometimes watch Virginia Satir and I'm like, I'm never going to disclose as much as her. So I'm just going to, I'm just going to do a little bit to open up that attunement. Like, if I show the culture that we're people, we're human, then maybe my clients will go there too.
So I will agree with that. So for example, I had I was in the beginning when we were, you know, the stay-at-home order was being put in place, and, you know, things were looking pretty scary. Everything was like, how are you dealing with everything? How's your job? And I was having the same conversation over and over again. And part of it is that, you know, clients check in with you too, like, how are you doing, blah, blah, which I think is pretty nice, right? Like, yeah, I'm all right. And so one of my clients had said, like, how are you? Like, you know, is your practice okay? Like, you know, are people still coming in? And I said, to be honest, yes, everything's all right. But I said, I'm kind of tired talking about COVID. And he was like, you too? Okay, good. We don't have to talk about it. And there was this liberation that happened, right, in the particular moment where I allowed myself just to be myself, right? And the session was actually really powerful because there were some other things that were happening. But I mean, just that ability, when a wounded healer is like, I'm an individual too that's going through this, right? And I have thoughts and feelings, and how am I going to use myself, right, to model for our families, our individuals, our couples that, like, you know, us being tired too validates the fact that they can be tired too, or they can be frustrated too, or they can be worried too, or any of those particular things. And again, they provide such a meaningful context for people because it highlights the humanity, the frailty of humanity sometimes, right? And if we do, it makes change 10 times easier because we're traveling along, journeying along with them around, you know, this hard thing that they're trying to change about them, or hard things they're trying to address in their lives. And it just makes it easier when there's company to do this.
Mm-hmm. I find that I try to like switch between, sometimes I'll tell myself what I'm feeling, Other times I'll tell my clients real quick, because I think there's that idea of like, if your clients ask you, how are you doing during the pandemic, which I've gotten like from everybody. And like that if we have that rigid robotic professionalism and be like, well, I'm not allowed to self-disclose, like I can't say anything. And then the entire time you're thinking about not saying how things are going on. And like, you're much more vulnerable to actually project your views on your clients when you're not attuning towards actually what's happening on you. And so I think like, I just say it real quick. I'm like, yeah, it's hard, but I'm here, and I'm here for you. And even if it's something like that, as simple as that. And obviously we want to keep our boundaries. Our clients are paying us, of course. But I think if it, like you said, if it opens the door for them too, there's a professional reason to do it sometimes.
I don't disagree with that at all.
All right. Well, I love talking about pot with you, Anthony.
Every day, all day.
Person of the therapist. Okay, here we go. Last one. So, and then we'll take question and answer afterwards. So one is, I think, we reflected on this earlier, but I think like just naming that this is difficult. If you see messaging out there that like, this is a good time, like we needed this, like this had to happen. And I reflected earlier about like my personal, like my fasting that I'm doing, like getting messages like, oh, maybe this will be the best month of fasting ever. And I'm like, or it might be the worst one. Like it might be the hardest one. And I think like being honest about that, that difficulty is functional. It helps us be grounded. I think when we, for example, in therapy with our clients name difficult feelings, it could be a grounding tool. Like it's hard to navigate feelings. It's hard to navigate this stuff that is churning inside, and we don't exactly know how to focus it one way or the other all the time. And maybe we didn't even do anything to create that feeling. Like a lot of times we don't. We're just human beings with physiology, and sometimes we blame ourselves for that. And so I just like to, in addition to validating the slower pace of productivity, naming that this stuff is hard. Like it's not, pandemics are not like easy. So this idea of, hey, this is a time for you to just like do 10 of the hobbies that you've never done before and read 1 million of the books and take on 100 clients, and all of it will be fantastic and it'll be personal reflection. No, hard no. Like it's also hard. And maybe some of that stuff is shining through because we're resilient beings and we are able to do some of that stuff we've been waiting to do, for sure. But that doesn't negate the fact that this is hard. And if we're in touch with that, kind of like the wounded healers concept, if we're in touch with that, then when clients say it's hard for them, we'll know a little bit about what they're talking about rather than being so away from it.
I really agree with that. And I think the notion when you're talking about like the pandemic, like this is like literally like the world has stopped, right? And like all at once, even when there was World War I or World War II or other like big things like that, the whole world didn't stop. And we've had to, right? And I think that like that's been very difficult to just stop. I mean, in a way though, do we get things that have been meaningful for us and we can find some kind of assignment and value to it? Sure, but I think it's just difficult. It's very difficult, and people are having a hard time. We might be having a hard time, and it's okay to have a hard time around it. And some of our abilities to be able to address the things that we could have in person have been limited too, right? There's some Q&A that's coming through around like how to deal with specific clinical issues, which we're not going to necessarily talk about like supervision around that, but I do want to acknowledge that like it's difficult to be able to address things that we could do in person that we can't now, right? And that's just the limitation. And like you said, naming the difficulty of all that. We're a bad therapist does not mean that we're not competent enough, does not mean that we don't have the right training. It just means that it's changed how we're able to practice. And that's just the reality of where we're living in this particular moment. So
absolutely. It reminds me of that concept of like authenticity towards oneself.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the Satyrian like experiential therapy concept. Like when you're authentic towards yourself, you create room for your clients to be authentic too towards you. But I think like even not just with the outcome of clients, like this is not a time to like be dishonest with oneself about stuff, and however you treat yourself in these months during the pandemic, it will have implications for how you come out of it too. And so if you spend a lot of months being like, oh, it's fine, everything's fine, I don't know, like we've had like friends who have had loved ones who are like compromised, like, you know, I can't see my mom right now because she's 68, her immune system's not great. And so if I was just sitting here and I was like, everything's fine, like everyone's fine, like there's no problem, I can just get into my crafts, like it's a hard, and like I'd like to find ways to be resilient, and this stuff is hard, it's not easy.
Agreed.
I think that's I think those are our topics. I think we're good to go on that, and so I think we're going to move to a question and answer now. That's cool.
Yeah. So do you want me to start to read out some of the questions, or do you want to like take turns doing that? How do you want to do that?
How do we
Or
decide?
I can read them to you,
Oh.
you two.
Yeah.
However you want to do it, just let me know.
Oh, it's like there's a voice coming from somewhere. Okay.
I'm out here somewhere.
Okay, yeah, you can read them to us and we can kind of talk about them.
All right. So this one's about taking insurance. This came earlier in the presentation. The question is, if you aren't taking insurance, you can offer a sliding scale fee reduction during COVID, but legally you can't do that if you have insurance contracts. You can't offer insurance because you can't offer insurance clients different fees than your contracted rates, and it isn't ethical. Can you comment on that? Just that kind of glitch in the system?
Yeah, Anthony, you want to start?
Yeah. So when I was talking about sliding scale fees for or rates for individuals, that really, yes, that is true. Like if you have someone that is with Primera, right, you offer them the Primera rate that you contract for. Now, if the person loses their insurance coverage, right, and they still want to come and see you, yes, you are free to negotiate whatever you would wish to for that client. I think that's what we were kind of talking about. But if clients are having trouble paying their copay, that's a whole other conversation around. If they keep their insurance and don't pay their and they can't pay their copay, that's a whole other conversation around perhaps like, what to do and how to do that. I mean, it's also up to you, to be honest too. Like if you wanted to honor the fact that they couldn't pay, but you still can bill their the insurance company is not going to care that you collect or not collect that copay. That's your responsibility to follow through with that. And I think that it is also a viable way of being able to offer some kind of extension should you choose to. But that conversation we were talking about specifically around sliding fee is around those who do not have insurance. That's what I was, just to clarify around that. Would you take anything from that explanation, Z, or?
And I think it's like I think it's sort of an ethical thing for the therapist to just be attuned to the transitions. Like it's not like a hard line, like you can or cannot do things with clients. I mean, I know that there are parameters with each insurance company that we need to know about so that we're not violating that. So I think with respect to that, that makes sense. But even without the pandemic, like I'll see like a family member and they're like, I don't want the person who holds the insurance to know that I'm seeing therapy. I'm like, what are the options? We open up a dialogue about, okay, what are the other ways to do it, right? And not only that, but there are, for example, like our whole field is trying to like, change some things in terms of like hours of training, like look into what insurances are doing, and then like make sure that clients who might feel shame otherwise can tell you, because they, maybe the feedback culture in therapy, you need to make sure that it's there so they can tell you if they've lost their insurance. So I think it is true that we need to protect ourselves ethically when it comes to legalities of stuff, but when it comes to like ethics where it converges with morality and power dynamics, like we also need to make room for clients to tell us if they've lost their insurance or if they can't come as often. Mm-hmm. Like just opening that dialogue is really what we're getting at, not necessarily saying that you can be willy-nilly. Do your homework and open the door.
Indeed.
Great. And then one of our attendees, Joshua Gates, commented that many insurance companies are waiving co-pays right now to help clients financially. And so the challenge is really more about those who, and so another challenge then is really about those who don't have insurance.
And I just want to add a small little thing is like I did a lot of the research for making sure the resources were up to date for the legislative committee to put out. And those copays the copay waive may only be towards medical services for COVID-related illnesses, not necessarily for mental health. So just double check, and that may vary by insurance, but like Z said, just do your homework.
Yeah, great. Zain, do you want to unshare your screen so we can see the two of you a little bit better too, since we're done with your slide? All right. Another question from one of the attendees put in the question, generally I utilize email for scheduling and logistics only. During this time, any thoughts on email blurring as a check-in supplement, especially if frequency of meeting has declined due to financial reasons?
Yeah, I guess I'll start on that. What's that last part? What's declined?
If frequency of sessions, so they're coming in less frequently, can email be used as a way to check in?
Yeah, I think like this is a good time to be flexible about how we check in. I think like every clinician has different boundaries about that. Mm-hmm. You know, for example, when I talked about doing therapy in a home-based setting, a lot of those clients didn't have access to like computers and emails. And so we would have to like make sure that we were talking to like some person who was a representative of theirs, or we'd set up an appointment in advance, or it'd be something like logistical through DHS or something, or a phone call. And so then that begs the therapist to use maybe a second personal line, but make it only professional, or make sure that your voicemail reflects your practice. Like these things are depending on the context. So in my opinion, the pandemic brings a new context where it might be a good time to rethink how you might otherwise use your email and phone with respect to your boundaries. You still want to be boundaried. You still want to be able to say, this is how I'm laying out my professional boundaries, if you're cool with yourself about it. But there is no like hard and fast rule that you can't use your email. I would say that if you have a practice email, use your practice email. Don't use your personal email, of course. And you know, of course, there are some no-nos, like don't Facebook message your clients or something like that. But I think if you're using your practice email and there's something in your heart that's saying like, this is a good way to check on my clients right now, it's okay to switch it up during a pandemic.
I don't think I would disagree with that at all. I think that there's also the ethical part of me that's like, you know, making sure that we don't abandon our clients in a particular way because their situation changes, right? And it is about boundaries. And if it is something that you traditionally don't do and you're looking to do, it starts off with a conversation, right? Like, hey, this is what I thought. I want to check in with you via email, even though we normally don't. Are you okay with that? And if your clients say yes, that's great. If they say no, then you understand that you've done all you needed to do to make sure that you can still continue to, you know, meet that need and check in with them.
Kind of a follow-up question. What about email and text not being HIPAA compliant?
So I do know that the HIPAA laws have been laxed to allow non-preferred and other, pretty much any medium for people to be able to talk to each other has been relaxed. But you know, I think number one, really keeping if it's via email and it's business, like making sure that there's no necessarily clinical information flying back and forth, right? Like making sure that you're not saying like your diagnosis is, or like, this is what someone did, like that may need to be, you know, resigned to only like in-person, Zoom conversations or telehealth conversations or even phone conversations. But even then, still making sure that like people aren't having, you know, therapy when they're out walking in the woods, right? Or on trails or in, you know, neighborhoods. So kind of being cautious around that and making sure that like, the laws have been lax, but making sure that we have boundaries even when we choose to use other mediums. See, would you say something different or add?
Yeah, and I think the email conversation is nuanced. I don't think it's a hard and fast line first, number one. But I think if you are using email, one way to make sure that you don't get in trouble, but two, that your client is protected, is always make sure that you're using your professional email. You don't talk about what Anthony was saying, like you don't talk about diagnosis. Hey, remember don't do a case note through email, right? That's like another thing. Put a confidentiality statement. at the end of your email as well. And what will also protect you is during intake, or if you haven't done it yet, check in with your client and document it that they've said it's okay to email them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you get their permission to email them, email is okay. Kind of like even on assessment forms, they say it's text or, a phone call for appointments. Okay. Get that permission from that client. And that'll also be another way to check in. During a session, if you're just checking with your client, hey, I was thinking about, checking in with you. Oh yeah, completely. You can use my email. And then another way to do that on the back end is underneath your name or somewhere in your signature, put like, the confidentiality, like there's some statements that you can see that professionals use, like, that this is confidential information, not to be shared outside of this email context. And that way, if there is some threat to it, you have protected yourself professionally, and you've also protected your client, because even if somebody does happen upon it, they're not supposed to look at it, see it, or anything like that, or use it.
There's a comment as well that in order to have email encryption to make things HIPAA compliant, there's programs out there, including G Suite, which Gmail Suite, which is about just $6 a month. So that might be an affordable option for a lot of clinicians. How about, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's take a question on from a student. How can we manage anxiety prior to turning on Zoom with clients? I'm finding myself getting more anxious prior to session than normal. And so how can we stay present with clients when the screen glitches and separate us? And then another question kind of related, can you also touch on telephone counseling a little bit, especially for interns who are just starting out?
So those are excellent questions. I like that, but I would just remind them about like validating less productivity, right? Like that you're not going to have the necessarily same impact as in person, and it's okay. And making room for technical difficulties. Like technology is great, but when it doesn't work, it's not that great, right? And I think that's a universal understanding that people have. And if you acknowledge that when the screen glitches or your internet goes out because everybody in the world is online at the same time, right? Which isn't a complete understanding. People will be more apt to kind of understand that and be forgiving, right? Than we think that they will be. So just kind of putting it out there. But really, like I said, like just making sure that you validate the fact that you're not going to be as productive necessarily, and that you may just be able to address one particular thing in that session. And that is like, that's fine. People understand that they're not going to have like these huge, profound breakthroughs and be able to hug you at the end of the session or, high five you and things like that. It may just be a singular thing they're coming to. With regard to telephone, that's actually very interesting because we can't see people's facial expressions, right? And we can't read them nonverbal. We can't read the nonverbal things that are happening for them. So we do, in a way, have to like monitor and manage ourselves and maybe be a little more inquisitive around like, well, I can't see you, but like, can you tell me how you feel and how would I know that, right? Like those particular kind of questions, being more curious around what's happening. And people may be able to hold that or not, right, on the phone. But again, it's about limiting some of those expectations that we might have that what therapy should look like versus actually how therapy is actually happening given our current context. Z?
Yeah, and I just want to comment too, like, I'm seeing some questions, and I also experienced this, in different platforms. I think it's really important not to be hard-lined about something you may have heard is appropriate or not. Like a lot of these things go out the window when you consider different contexts. For example, outside of a pandemic, when you are a therapist, the only therapist in a village. All right. So the rules are that you're not supposed to address, what are the typical rules? The typical rules of ethics are one way, right? But there's also about doing your best, right? So for example, I'll give a personal example. I get a lot of clients who are Muslim, and there's a lot of stigma about Muslim clients or disenfranchised clients in general, going to therapy, right? Either by race, religion, economy, et cetera, going to therapy. And so if I see a client in therapy, I'm also like likely to see one of them at the mosque, right? So, and then they say hi to me or something like that. So there are context considerations and context sensitivities to be had. A pandemic's a really good one, right? And as much as you do want to protect yourself and be hard line, that's very different. Being professional and being rigid are not the same thing. So make sure you do your homework, especially at a time like that, because HIPAA is applying some effects. And I know there are definitely things that you want to make sure that you're boundaried about, that you can make rules about, so you stay professional throughout your life. But you need to attend to the flexibility that your clients need to go through as well, and you need to check on them. Abandonment is also an ethical consideration. So how are you going to solve that, right? So it's important to consider that as well. And I found it really valuable to take CEs on ethics that address those problems directly, because it's not as hardlined as one might think. There are situations in home therapy that don't function like outpatient therapy. It's just not the same. The ethical application is actually different. But if we walk around saying, well, it's actually this one size fits all, and the ethical considerations and how we navigate them are the same because that's what I read, it's not true. You know, there are definitely nuances to consider. But in terms of like getting ready for therapy, I want to address this because it's an anxiety that I have as well. Like, all right, full disclosure, when I teach 4 classes during the week, sometimes those are sweatpants classes right now. But for my clients, I don't know why, but I'm like, I need to wear pants. I don't know why. I think there's a difference. Am I respecting my clients more? I don't know. Maybe there's like a direct money exchange that we're doing. I don't know. But I that's all. The levity is just to say, like, I think there is going to be some like, okay, now I'm about to go on Zoom. What if they're waiting in the waiting room? I've had a situation where like I'm on Zoom and then they're not there. So then I'm like suddenly worried I did something wrong. We sent them the link wrong or something. All those things come up. And I think taking a breather, being honest with yourself, if you can't do that many back-to-backs. I had my therapist say, yo, I'm seeing you on a certain day. Can I switch days with you? Because this is, and he self-disclosed about why. And I think like, you got to do that with yourself at least and just be like, you know, I think I need a break. So next time I'm not going to do back-to-backs. Or, you know what? I need to turn on like my favorite song to get in a good headspace right before this next session. I watch a television show sometimes if I have a half an hour break and I eat lunch, like doing something to decompress before, because you're going to experience some anxiety that's a little bit weird during this time. I definitely feel it before session. So I just want to validate that, normalize that and say, I see you. I feel it too. It's not the same gearing up as like getting coffee, getting out of your car, getting your therapy room ready. You know, it's not the same.
Can we talk about for folks who are like in this process about to start new practices? Can you talk about what new clinicians can do if they're starting teletherapy practices from home and they have kids there? Or how do they market to get word out right now during this pandemic? And then can you also speak to the experience of starting a therapeutic relationship via telehealth? That's different than starting one in person. And so can you speak to that?
Yeah. Where to start? Let's pick one to start. I think getting started off in general, I'll address that one first. Jen, I might need you to remind me about the other questions. But like some of the anxieties on getting started off and you know, how to do this work and working with clients, it's really important to latch on to mentors you respect, whether they're at your agency site or whether they're teachers outside of that, like maybe at your schools, because that'll help you have a sense of advocacy. I saw one of the questions was like, what if your agency is scheduling you back to back? I think it's reasonable to, if that's a bit much, to go back to the person there and say like, can I have maybe an hour in between? Or, you know, talking to your, whoever your approved supervisor is about that. In general, we need to have more advocacy for our students while they're at clinical sites that we're not burned out. You're still training. So you need opportunities to feel supported, to feel like people are catching you in between the sessions to see how you're doing. So I think finding a source of advocacy if you're burned out, either directly at your site if that's possible, and if it's not, that's a whole other problem. So we got to be talking to, you know, I know at our school at Antioch, we want to know if you don't feel supported by your sites, and we want to be able to support you all and, you know, find a way to navigate or troubleshoot that. So I think it's really important to directly say if you're needing some support and help.
Well, for folks who are starting their own practice, like what are some thoughts about starting practice during this pandemic? And then also starting new client, for those of us in practice too, like starting new client relationships by telehealth.
Yeah, Anthony, do you want to lead that one?
So, I think starting new practices during this time, in a way, it is opportune. I mean, Washington State is woefully under like staffed, if you will, right, around mental health clinicians, just in general. So, you know, if people are coming into the field, I always welcome that. I think it's good. We're very happy that that's happening. And there definitely is a need during this time. With regard to starting someone with telehealth, it's an interesting challenge. I myself have not had to do that because I'm just not in a position to take new clients on at this particular moment. But I would imagine that would require a lot of just accommodation, right? To make sure that you can understand that the person is understanding you and vice versa, and making room for any navigation of technology. But I think also what comes to mind too is like having a sense of humor around it, right? And using humor to really connect with people. Because the basic thing is that you want to join, right? You want to be able to have a relationship. And again, how we joining online versus joining in person are definitely different, but I think we can still tell at the end of the day if a person is connected to us and we're connected to them. And just being maybe a little more explicit around that, around like, you know, these are my thoughts, this is my feeling, how are you feeling about what's happening? But humor comes to mind definitely, and how you can create an environment for that to happen. I think also there was that, the conversation around doing telehealth with children around in the house, and that's definitely a challenge, right? Like if you can, like how can you section off a part of your home to be dedicated only to therapy? But let's be real, some of us live in Seattle, right, with a whole 700 square feet, and even if we had, you know, 2,000 square feet, if we have kids are everywhere. They're going to be in your space. So you know, some of that is like, you know, if you can have conversations with kids, but also making room that like what's happening to you has probably happened to your families too, right? That a kid may come wandering in at some particular point, and it's okay. It doesn't mean that you didn't boundary off or section off in a particular way. So having some like ease and forgiveness around that is what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I wanted to add just about like marketing right now. If you're trying to get new clients, if you're starting your practice, this is a great time to be creative about that too. You know, like for example, we made some cheesy video and like 50 more people signed up yesterday for some reason. I don't know. But I think like, you know, market yourself, you know, as, you know, telehealth provider right now, and, put something out that you're being responsive to the pandemic. People are suffering, man. Like people are struggling out there, and people are waiting for somebody to talk to too. And so I think like, make sure that you're like, whether it's on Psychology Today or your LinkedIn, like whatever it is that you need to kind of spruce up, this might be a good time to do that and have it reflect the circumstances we're going into, because we don't know really when this is going to end. We get different information. Certain states are extending their stay-at-home order for another month. So I think it's important to market directly about the pandemic. And yeah, and with terms of, I saw a question there too about like practices and interventions. You have to be creative. Like what I might collaboratively write with my clients about, I put in a chat box, or we might share something through email. My therapist asked me about something that I was working on personally, and I sent him that thing like through email. Like so, it wasn't like anything that was confidential. It was something that I was already doing publicly that I wanted to show him, and something like that. So, there's a lot of different creativity that you can use here that can sort of approximate and work around your interventions. It's a really good time to be client-centered. Ask your clients what's going on for them and tailor your interventions to what their actual lived context is. Right now, that's a pandemic. And you should be centering your work around your clients' lived experiences anyway, not hyper-applying theory and interventions without checking in if it works with their life anyway. Right now, that means a pandemic. So how you apply your interventions needs to be collaborative with your client's circumstances.
And just real quick, two things. So I had a supervisee talk about them working with a child who was on the spectrum, and they got, they're like, is it too much? Is it too little? But part of them being able to respond was like using emojis through the text box, right? And then they felt, the kid felt at ease and easier to be able to communicate around how they were feeling, and the student went with it. And I was like, that's wonderful, right? Like how we're being flexible enough, client-centered like that. And also, I liked our video. It was super cheesy, but I enjoyed making it. So I just want to put it out there.
Let's shift gears. We have just probably time for one or two more questions. Could you discuss issues around DV and how the increase of stress for families that are sheltering together during this time? Additionally, how can we communicate to these families how are we communicating to families that schools have decided? Let's answer that first question first. This is a two-part question. So can you address issues around DV and potential family violence that may be happening when people are sheltered together right now?
Yeah, what Anthony was saying earlier is so imperative. Finding ways for people to have privacy, even if it's for that hour, so they can talk to you directly. If it's not possible, deciding upon, wherever you can, decide upon codes. I mean, I know that's not perfect, but I had a friend of mine who said, hey, like I'm selling scented candles. By the way, I'm not actually selling scented candles, but if you message me about this, maybe I'll know that means something else. Or if you ask to buy one, I'll know that you're talking about active, putting parameters up like that. That's a little bit hard to do. And I'm not asking you all to do that so you get an influx of messages, but you want to make sure that you're giving outlets to clients to signal to you if they need your support in that. But I definitely think that, for example, if you're seeing couples therapy and this might be a good time to do individual sessions too, just to kind of check in to see what's going on. You want to approximate that confidential space as much as possible and create more opportunities where there's less, right? Where there's less right now, create more opportunities on your end where they can reach out to you privately.
I also want to, I think that's a good idea, but I also think about like children, right? And I saw like there was a report in the news that the levels of, or the number of reports that are being made to CPS have been lowering, specifically because school's not in play. And that's obviously a major source of CPS referrals. But I think that using the chat box, like some kids may not have the ability to like verbally be away from parents, right? And they may say something about that, but use of the chat box is an appropriate way, I think, to be able to check in if there might be any DV. And some of this is like, again, limitations of where we are. You're not going to necessarily be able to get to that if they don't have privacy. And there's only so much one can do to kind of navigate that, like to have privacy one-on-one. And, specifically if there is active DV in a couple, they doing that individual work could, set something off. So I think it's important to be mindful of that, but, be creative with how you're able to communicate with some of your clients in a way that may allow you to check in if there is active DV or to assess, right, that if things are happening.
I'm so glad that question was asked, because as health professionals, doctors, therapists, all across the board, we actually don't do a good enough job to create opportunities for DV check-ins. We might do it in our first session as part of an intake question, but clients don't share with you everything about their life and their traumas, either in real time or in past, in the first session. Like they, need to feel it out, or maybe they feel it's more pertinent later on, or they talk to you about different things. So I'm very glad that we're using this time during the pandemic to remind ourselves that we should check in. If you create those regular check-ins about safety in general, just safety in general, loft it up, make it easy for clients to talk about, and you make that part of your culture in therapy, the more opportunities you will have to create space for your clients to tell you about what's going on.
Here's a good question about kind of personal therapist stuff that comes up for us. Well, kind of. How do we constantly stop thinking about what we're doing in client sessions with counseling? How do we stop thinking about our clients once the session is over? And as a new clinician, it's hard to separate for me counseling and personal life, which causes problems with sleeping, self-care, etc. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's cool if I start, Anthony.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't force myself to stop thinking about my clients. I think that we are human. There's this age-old idea that you leave your stuff at the door when you go to therapy, and you leave your therapy stuff at work when you come home. Obviously, that's all mixed up too because we're all at home while we're working. But you're human. You're going to think about things that are meaningful to you. There's this idea on television that, like, when you get over somebody, from your past, and you get over them or whatever, and as if to say you never think about them, and that if you have any pang, that makes you remember them, that you're not over them anymore, right? But these are television ideas. We're human beings, in my opinion. We're human beings, and, well, we're all human beings. That's just my opinion. But in my opinion, we do think about what we care about. And one of the ways to mitigate the additional stress of that is to be honest about that. Sometimes just naming and normalizes it demystifies the whole thing. If you're avoiding something constantly, you're doing the work to avoid that thing. And it can fixate on your mind more. When you acknowledge that it's happening, you can demystify it a little bit. And that's a core tenet and person of the therapist, is to acknowledge that stuff happens for you too as the therapist. I switch gears personally much easier when I come home and I say to myself or to my partner or to a friend, hey, I had a hard day. That was hard. I had some hard cases. And then I go, you don't know to breathe like that if you have the pretense of, like, I'm not supposed to be thinking about it. So my suggestion is lean into the acknowledgement that you are thinking about clients. Don't give yourself added pressure to not be human right now.
I agree with that. And to keep in mind, we're talking about, like, humanity and accepting that this is happening to us, that our experience also is a level of vicarious trauma, right? And that a pandemic or war, these things, like, are atrocities that happen to us, and that have real issues that spring up from it. And so us being kind to ourselves to kind of acknowledge that this is affecting us in a particular way goes to being able to turn off, right? And that when we acknowledge that this was a hard day, this was a hard case, or I'm tired of talking about the same thing, and finding a way to be able to, separate out from the work in a way that allows us to reset. Like, for me, like I said, I like to go for a walk sometimes at the end of the day because I've been staring at the screen for so long, and I can't just do it anymore. I can't just, like, okay, I'm done with screen time, I'm just going to go do X, Y, Z now. Like, which might involve more screen time about something else, right? Like, I need to give myself, like, biologically a chance to reset from the stimulus that's been happening over and over again. But that comes from, I think, being able to honor that I'm overstimulated. I see that my body's happening, and I see that my body's doing this, and it's happening to me, and I'm feeling this particular way. I'm going to allow myself to feel that, and I'm going to allow myself an opportunity to kind of just de-escalate from all of that.
Yeah, and if it becomes overwhelming, like if you feel like your body's buzzing after seeing a couple of clients or something, that's where pairing a lot of what we talked about during this entire session. Call up a supervisor, somebody you can actually talk to about the case on your drive home. Or some days you're going to need, like, I had a hard day, and that's all you're going to need. Other days you're going to need, like, okay, stuff was brought up in me and I need to cry. Like, there's a whole range. So it's not like all or nothing. Mm-hmm. You want to reach into all of the ways that you might show up after a session. And you might surprise yourself if you take care of yourself that way, in more repetition, like you're acknowledging your feelings more. By the end of a week or a month, like, you'll see, you know what, like, I actually do manage that a little bit better because I'm not, like, separating from what's actually happening to me.
All right, Zain and Anthony, thank you so much today. I've been getting lots of emails and comments directly sent to me about just how much people are appreciating you and your relatability and your insight today. So I really appreciate it. So as we're speaking right now, Michelle Sullivan is sharing the link to the next breakout room. You should have all also received this by email. So we'll take about a 20-minute break right now, and at 11:30, just log back on to this new Zoom link that will bring you to another meeting room, and you'll be automatically divided into your groups. So please remember to log in with Zoom with the email that you registered for this event with, so you can make sure to get you plugged into the right group. We also have a lot of different questions that we didn't get a chance to answer during this time because you guys were asking tons of great things. I think what I'm going to do is take these questions and I'm going to transfer them over to our Facebook group and also to our AMFT community page. I think this is a good place for people to interact. A lot of questions are about, well, one of the questions was about what does WAMFT have to offer in terms of allowing us to connect to one another. And this is one of the things that we can share. We have our main Facebook page, and we also have private groups for clinical members, for preclinical members, for student members. So you can chat about some of this stuff there. You can share resources, you can have clinical discussions. These are all great places to do that. So I'm gonna work on transferring those all over there. So please take those conversations online to social media. Also, if you have other questions that you want to ask either WAMFT or one of our presenters, and I guess I'm speaking for them, but I'm guessing that they'll be happy to answer questions as they come in afterwards as well. So feel free to email WAMFT directly, wamft@wamft.org. We're happy to forward that to Zain and Anthony for their responses. So with that, I want to thank our presenters one more time. They're also going to be helping us with group facilitation shortly. So we'll see you all online there. Enjoy your break, and I'll see you back at 11:30.